Climate defense budgets. What is that? Primal houses to zero-energy houses. Is it possible? From the sections of EUROSOLAR, the International Renewable Energy Storage Conference 2021, we present EUROSOLAR TV. Welcome to EUROSOLAR TV. This program is native in German language, but the translation you are listening to is not going to be the last word. In the future, we will also offer other native languages. In our today's show, our guest is Peter Droege. He is the president of EUROSOLAR. Mr. Droege, what do we want to achieve with EUROSOLAR TV?
We want to reach out to people. We want to multiply our news, our contents, our political demands, focus on new media and connect with our members, our constituents, our political contacts. Therefore, it is about two directions of communication, and we achieve this best through EUROSOLAR TV.
EUROSOLAR is actually an expert organization, an association, a committee, an NGO, which collects a lot of expertise and enjoys great public prestige and attention with the EUROSOLAR Awards. And EUROSOLAR TV wants to disseminate this expertise, this knowledge, Mr. Droege, more broadly through multimedia activities.
And that is what it is truly about. Spreading our demands, our knowledge on a political level, on an implementable level for citizen-based renewable energies that create resilience, create prosperity, create independence, as well as create autonomy on an urban and community level. It is about people, which is evident in the fact that EUROSOLAR is also a membership association. We are member-based. We have constituents on various levels in different countries of Europe. It is about all of Europe, from Russia to Iceland. Of course, our main central organization takes place in Germany, but moreover, we stand for our citizens, for our society and our independence from fossil and nuclear energy.
Let us start. Climate defense budgets. What is that? How do we save the climate at the last second? How do we finance and shape the transition out of the fossil fuel economy to a society that uses renewable energy exclusively as its energy source? Martin Jörg explains how.
Almost $2 trillion are spent on armaments worldwide. As a result of the current pandemic, even higher expenses are currently being incurred. The Corona Pandemic shows how vulnerable our economy and way of life is. Furthermore, climate change threatens our survival. That is why all available resources must be mobilized to fight the fossil fuel pandemic in order to halt the climate crisis. Therefore, EUROSOLAR demands that the armaments budgets be reallocated and used for the long overdue and peacemaking energy restructuring of Germany and Europe. Instead of conflicts and wars, cooperation and mutual assistance in building up regenerative energy supplies financed by predetermined climate defense budgets.
Im Aufbau regenerativer Energieversorgung, finanziert durch festgelegte Klimaverteidigungsbudgets.
Investing instead of reacting. The budgets are, among other things, for financing the restructuring of the fossil fuel industry, employment programs in renewable industries, the reduction of emissions, as well as bio and industrial sequestration. The budgets can be implemented at national, European and UN level. In addition to cuts in defense budgets, there are other financing options. Savings as a result of avoided environmental damage. Withholding tax on fossil fuels. and regenerative financing mechanisms that reward system-wide defossilization, agrarian reform, and reforestation with higher returns than short-term investments.
Climate defense budgets is exactly the right word to describe the significance of what stands behind it. We have to defend our society, our lives. We have to defend nature, and in a defense budget, everything we are willing to invest must be invested to defend our survival interests. There is another ongoing parameter where we are already doing it, namely, currently in the present corona crisis worldwide. Huge budgets are being mobilized to overwhelm this crisis. That, Mr. Droege, is exactly what climate defense budgets should implement.
Absolutely, and they are aimed at an even more explosive topic, which is much more urgent than corona, and that is climate destabilization, which is now explosively ongoing due to the lateral progress of climate change, the alteration in the climate system due to fossil energy, emissions and so on. And it is no longer enough to pursue conventional climate protection. It is no longer enough to aim for climate neutrality or zero emissions compared to 1990. No, we must manage to supply our economy with 100% renewable energy. Not as an end goal, but as a basis to then sequester emissions from the atmosphere. Currently, we have too much CO2, too much methane in the world's atmosphere, and our economy, our agriculture, our forestry, our construction industry can all be part in reducing those excess concentrations. And that is what we are all about. That implies 100% renewable energy as a basis for sustainable economy.
You have just seen in the insert film what we are doing with the climate defense budgets. Essentially, these are points that EUROSOLAR has already described with the regenerative decade in its 10-point program. These are actually the core points needed to initiate and finance with the climate defense budget.
Actually, this shows that the range of measures that must be undertaken as a structural change, as a structural transition for our economy and society, will have a strong positive influence on the productivity of our economy. That impact alone, through the conversion to regenerative energy supply for agriculture, forestry, industry, productivity, and financial sectors, which today are all, let us say, bobbing along in a conventional system. But now, because of the explosive situation we find ourselves in, we really have to step our efforts and mobilize our economy. And it is not unlike preparing for an invisible or visible enemy, a threat of an existential nature, national but also international.
Existenzielle Art, nationaler, aber auch internationaler Art.
The present situation is unprecedented. From this follows that the challenge to work together with others, to work peacefully, to react to this common threat in a concentrated way, is an existential challenge that we must not shy away from. But that requires this very focus on the defensiveness of the climate with a budgetary prioritization of various measures, as described by the regenerative decade. The good thing is that these are not actually new topics that first have to be researched, have to be developed, but which now unfortunately only exist peripherally at the political level of discussion, but are not used in a targeted way. Therefore, we are demanding for these measures to be used target-oriented. Let us coordinate together with our neighbors, as well as our adversaries. Let us remodel and reduce defense budgets. Let us profit from migration flows. Our economy must also bind negative emissions from the atmosphere. Fundamentally, however, EUROSOLAR's core mission remains that the 100% renewable energy transition accelerates. and not only in the generations until 2050 or until 2080, but in this decade. That is our goal. We do not want to reach zero emissions compared to 1990, because the emissions throughout that year were also much too high. No, we want to get down to zero, and the only way to do that is through energy, cooperating with agriculture and other measures to make our economy more energy positive.
Peter Droege is right. The issues are obvious. Not only the issues, but also many possible solutions are openly accessible. But all the people who are concerned with climate change, with climate protection, with regenerative energy, have already determined we have solutions, but we do not have the implementation. Climate protection has been far too appellative internationally, and that is why climate defense budgets are so important, because it is not just about appealing and announcing we have solutions. In the end, the climate defense budgets are about budgeting. In other words, Mr. Droege, it is a matter of budgeting money for the implementation of these concepts, nationally and internationally.
That is correct. Of course, we know that in a conversion to renewable energies is possible in a market economy, but we also know that it will take a very, very long time. It needs incentives, it needs active structural changes in the existing energy system, in the corporate structures, in investment expectations, in the financial world. So it needs a targeted approach to these structural changes, how we should already know them. For example, from the early structural changes in the Ruhr, large budgets had been applied for the purpose of partnership cooperation between companies, communities, cooperatives, associations, etc., over a 10-20-year period, which, however, was not completed. Else, we would have a renewable Ruhr today. But now we know how it works politically and organizationally. But we need the budgetary resources to implement the measures with our allies targeted as a national defense strategy. And the allies are formed by everybody else, because everybody else is in the same boat. We all have the same enemy, the same threatening enemy, and that is the existential, destabilizing climate change that is due to fossil fuels and the general bad stewardship of our natural resources in agriculture, forestry, and so forth.
EUROSOLAR is talking about these climate defense budgets having to be about 5 to 8% of the gross domestic product. That is quite immense.
Yes, it is immense, but small compared to, for example, what the United States spent at the beginning of World War II under Teddy Roosevelt. It would be only a part of it. On the other hand, these expenses also represent investments that stimulate the economy, or there emerge savings from spending in conventional energy systems.
Einsparen von Ausgaben in konventionellen Energiesystemen zum Beispiel.
These would cost much higher sums over 10-20 years. In other words, these are differential costs that have to be spent.
Die auszugeben sind.
We have been guided by comparable values of a mobilization of comparable economies, so it can model what it signifies. Because the idea of climate defense budgets is new. It is new to us. We proposed it, we developed it. In fact, it is a resurrection of past times. In this regard, one can only study existing analogies, wherein communities, nations, peoples, but also European states have prepared themselves for a crisis of defensiveness.
Eine Krise der Verteidigungsbereitschaft. Also Verteidigungsnotstand sozusagen, eine gewisse
defensive emergency, so to speak, that is, recognizing the need to defend against the threat that is specifically definable and manageable, but is only manageable when we consider our national mission.
Nur managebar ist, wenn man seine nationale Aufgabe betrachtet und dafür eben auch es wird eines
It will require a budget so we know from comparable experiences in world history in similar mobilization strategies means a boost to the economy, an increase in the gross domestic product.
Vergrößerung des Bruttosozialproduktes Ich will jetzt nicht den Vergleich zum Zweiten Weltkrieg.
Now, I do not want to exaggerate the comparison with the Second World War. That is not the point. But just as an example, the United States started with a 15% effort at the beginning. At the end of World War II, 75% of the gross national product was assessed to win the war. By that time, of course, the gross domestic product had gotten much larger. It is not a good comparison, because this is also about restructuring an economy that needs to be prepared for the 21st century. We are now still practically in the 9th century. 20th century with our energy system more or less predominantly in place. And I am convinced that we will manage to dismantle those, but only if we have a target. We are convinced it will take 10 years. We know a budget is necessary, but not only for the economy or industry, but also for society.
Migration Management, Landwirtschaft.
Migration management, agriculture, also rebuilding an employment policy that is regenerative. And you mentioned COVID before. If we do not spend 80% of the COVID stimulus expenses on regenerating our economy, we are wasting the money, because COVID is related to an outdated way of interacting with our nature.
Veraltetes Umgehen mit unserer Natur.
Consequently, we find ourselves having an opportunity to spend that COVID money broadly diversified on multiple different things at the same time. And one of them is to build a regenerative economy and society that creates jobs, secures new jobs, and helps obsolete industries to downsize, rebuild, modernize. An opportunity like this does not come along very often.
This is not a crisis to waste. Peter Droege has just discussed COVID-19 and the strain the pandemic is putting on national budgets. This program itself is native in German, what you might also have noticed if you listen to the translation. In the Federal Republic of Germany, hence a comparative figure from Germany, 50% of the gross national product was spent in 1 year to master the pandemic. These expenditures are purely consumptive. The climate defense budget can be spent investive. Peter Droege said it himself. Within the framework of these 9 points, EUROSOLAR would like to implement them.
In addition to climate defense budgets as the first point, the regenerative decade includes 9 other points. Secondly, the introduction of a climate emergency diplomacy is called for. This involves ending acts of war and fighting the common enemy of global warming. It involves a worldwide plan for the billions of fellow human beings who will soon have a look for a new home. Thirdly, the targeted restructuring of fossil industries through technical substitution programs is essential. Fossil subsidies must be removed and regulations blocking renewable grids, storage and distributive systems must be dismantled. As a fourth point, a main task is structural reforms that enable the replacement of jobs in fossil industries with jobs in renewable industries. Fifth point. Since it is not enough to aim for climate neutrality, it is a matter of reversing emission targets. The year of reference for temperature must be before the Industrial Revolution. The global economy needs strategies that are capable of reducing the greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere. Sixth point. Fossil resources must be classified as toxic. After a short transition period, their promotion and dissemination should be declared as no longer justifiable or at least heavily taxed. Seventh point. The rapid development and regeneration of healthy, climate-active agricultural soils, wetlands and forests is a very urgent task. Eighth point. The transition of the construction industry must be centrally focused in economic policy. This means large-scale conversions of atmospheric CO2 into wood, carbon fibers and other solid carbon products. Ninth point, fully exploit all boosts of productivity and innovations for the massive expansion of high-quality employment opportunities for all citizens. 10th point, a new financing mechanism is needed that rewards long-term investments such as defossilization, agricultural reforms, and forestation with higher returns than short-term ones. This calls for sustainable banks of the future.
9 specific approaches in which we could transform our economy, in which we could change our consumption to purely renewable energy. Mr. Droege, I understand that correctly. This is money that is written into the national budgets as an actual fixed budget.
Unbedingt, da geht kein Weg daran vorbei, denn nur durch das Budgetieren wird es ernst genommen und auch.
Absolutely. There is no way around it, because it will only be taken seriously and implementable by budgeting. We need to build market-based instruments to accompany these changes. Eventually, we will make this quantum shift, the shift from one level of development to a much more advanced level at the regenerative level, without the use of older energy systems, without the construction and industrial production systems that do not create added values of CO2 reduction, nor reduce concentration and so on. These are the industries of the future. After all, that is exactly what is going to be needed for the next 50 to 100 to 200 years. Here there is an industrial revolutionary leap, which is clearly in front of our eyes, and if we do not invest in it, we will lose the chance of innovations on the one hand, but also the habitability of our continent on the other hand. It is not just about the Earth. It is also about our country. It is about our continental connections, our trading partners in agricultural products, and so on. All of them are under climatic pressure and have been wandering around for years. We witness it on TV. We read it in the newspaper. We are not really doing anything relevant about it, and this involves both medicating, that is aggressively rebuilding our economy and society and dealing with these processes, but also adapting, that is making sure that 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, there's still existing agriculture that is productive.
Das Anpassen, das heißt sicherstellen, dass in 5, 10, 15, 20 Jahren es noch eine Landwirtschaft gibt, die produktiv ist.
How do we finance climate defense budgets? On the one hand, the funding is already happening. There are structural adjustments, there are structural aids in the national economies and in the budgets of the countries. This money can be used to integrate into climate defense budgets. But of course, you need larger sums on top. One proposal is that we levy a withholding tax on the use of fossil fuels. This already exists to some extent with a CO2 tax, which is now being introduced everywhere.
Es ist sicher ein Instrument und es ist auch ein Instrument, das genutzt werden
It is certainly an instrument, and is also an instrument that should be used. But of course, it is an instrument that we hope will not be around for long, because we want to get rid of fossil fuels as a whole.
Die Maßnahmen umzusetzen, diese Industrie zurückzudrängen. Das wäre
Thereby, we do not want to keep a pollution industry that we can then tax in order to implement the measures, thus to eventually push them back to a minimum. That would correspond to a perpetual motion machine of self-defeat. I prefer to rely on other mechanisms. For example, COVID-19. These funds, not all, but a large part of these funds have been created out of nothing by banks, central banks, the national banks, and so on, by printing money. I am not in favor of printing money, but the money has been printed already, and why do not apply the money in a way that prioritizes the, as you have said before, investment applications? Investive regenerative applications of these scooped funds, which do not come from the normal budget, but nevertheless have relation to the budget, which are not applied to drive the status quo further, but to implement those changes from which we know are existentially important. Secondly, experiences have been made, as were studies and examples from Germany and other countries, that show that there are differential cost savings. That is, if I implement a solar economy today, or even just implement a solar park, and can replace one fossil power station for it, or the entire fossil power station park, then I can compare what the power station park would cost us more within the next 30 to 40 years. These costs are related to further construction, the maintenance, the management, the purchase of noteworthy resources, and so on. And these costs are compared in terms of solar implementation. Then very rapidly incredible savings occur, but deferred in time. So for example, maybe in 15 years it starts to generate profits in terms of differential cost savings. We refer to masses of studies and experiences from different regions in Germany. We live in a short-term thinking economy. This means that profits out of investments need to be generated short-term. That is one of the problems in our planetary existence. That is the short-term mentality of exclusive focus on economy and profits. But how do I manage to generate long-term profits and incentives today? We need something like future banks, which practically pay out profits today that will only be generated in the future, for investments that will secure the future. And that is not a new concept.
Das ist keine neue Raketenwirtschaft, dass wir wissen, wie man diese zukünftigen Profite
We know how to siphon off these future profits by using different financial mechanisms. But I also think it is very important that we do not just limit it to private finance, but that the government gets involved. Different levels of government need to shift future profits. Thirdly, and we will explain this more intensively in a separate program, it is about the financial possibilities. There are opportunities created by new electronic currencies. Parallel currencies can create tokenized currencies that specifically do two things. On the one hand, to only make regenerative investments, and secondly, have demurrage built in. Not negative interest rates, but something similar. They have a deadline, schedule. That means they must be spent, and when you get that money as payment, as an investment, as a loan, or as a credit in this tokenized parallel currency context, you are obliged to spend that in 12 months, or you lose 10% every 12 months. But in doing so, it has to be spent specifically on climate-stabilizing defending projects. And that stimulates an economy that is focused on making sure that we do not continue buying diesel cars or visiting the hairdresser 50 times when we do not need to.
Ankaufen oder zum Friseur 50 Mal gehen, wo wir es nicht brauchen oder so, sondern es ist eben gezielte Investitionen, die
These are targeted investments that are parallel currency bundled in the way that we have already known for 30 years, since the 20th century.
Aber jetzt natürlich global, international.
But are now, of course, applicable globally, internationally, but also sectorally, to the tokenization of financial flows, for example, parallel currencies. Overall, these were just examples of possible financial measures that I think are promising if they are targeted and not just existing as possibilities. They must be a part of the mobilization climate defense budget and therefore have an area that is responsible for the financial reforms that are needed to ensure that the spending is more and more climate stabilizing.
Reformen, die nötig sind, zu sichern, dass die Ausgaben mehr und mehr klimastabilisierend wirken.
This is what you describe as a regenerative financing mechanism, and this includes, for example, negative interest rates. Negative interest rates are very well known as an idea and have already been identified by economists as a very successful instrument. But Mr. Droege, that comes with a bit of a change of the global financing system.
Ja, ich bin sicher. Und wir sprechen von
Yes, I am convinced of that, and I'm also talking about a different kind of negative interest rates, compared to the ones that now have emerged through an extreme low interest rate, which has been created by printing new money. This is not just about the mass currency area, but a focused application of investments that have demurrage or some kind of negative interest rate structuring. In conclusion, I am rewarded by spending the money faster, so that I can have a loan for less money than it would normally cost me.
Geld haben kann, als es mir normalerweise kosten würde. Das heißt, ich werde belohnt,
I am rewarded to raise funds, but not to enrich myself with real estate or something comparable, but to make investments in the sustainable renewable economy, and with that, the renewable economy is being stimulated. But you are right, the phenomenon of interest rate is known as leverage. It can be used positively and should be used positively. But it needs some focus into what extent, which industries and economic areas it should be primarily applied.
In welchen Industriebereichen, wirtschaftlichen Bereichen das primär angewendet werden soll.
I already introduced the topic with the question of how we save the climate at the last minute with the use of climate defense budgets. This instrument, at the end, Mr. Droege, is therefore so important. We absolutely need such budgeting so that the national governments, in fact, have instruments with which they can organize, with which this can be organized internationally. Simply making options available to compensate for any damage will not be enough to get a grip on climate change, to achieve the transition to a fossil-free energy economy. In conclusion, we need to have instruments that governments can work with. The only question is, how do we implement climate defense budgets on an actual political level? Besides the needed expertise to organize something like this, how do you implement that? How do you enforce it?
Auf demokratische Art und Weise, indem man die Idee verbreitet, sie erklärt, sie nutzt, sie zusätzlich zu
on democratic terms, by spreading the idea, explaining it, using it to intensify it in addition to existing instruments, and pushing it forward with political partners. Partners from the industry, from the financial industry, and also in our community sectors, where budgets are actually used. But of course, it needs a willingness from the government side, a willingness that is palpable through the political constituents on which they are based. And I believe that this year, as an important election year in Germany, but everywhere in the world, as it's always an important election year, and in particular the pressure of climate change, the force of climate change has become so unbearable that recent polls have shown that 80% of the world's population is convinced that climate change must be stopped. This 80% conviction of the world's population has not yet translated into government climate action. We still have the same thought patterns as in the 1990s, 2000s, where climate action and neutrality will happen sometime by 2050. That is not enough. We need to take some responsibility now and set up budgets. Budgets as an extension of politics. Good policy must be expressed in their budgeting. This legitimizes actions, legitimizes negotiations with other nations, creates space to manage migration, but also throughout the high priority of what we defined in EUROSOLAR as 100% renewable energy transition in our economy. That is what we need to focus on after all. That is our expertise. Our mission, our message to the federal government and the governments of other countries in Europe regarding climate defense budgets. They are easy to present in their architectural structure. Now it is up to the politicians to implement them.
Strukturell leicht darstellbar. Jetzt ist an der Zeit der Politik, sie umzusetzen.
There are only two options. Either we pay consumptively for the damages of climate change in the future, or we deal with it now in an investment way and transition from a fossil to a renewable economy. These are the climate defense budgets. EUROSOLAR is not just called EUROSOLAR. EUROSOLAR is European. EUROSOLAR has 14 international sections.
Demnächst 15. Holland kommt dazu, also die Niederlande.
Soon it will be 15. Holland will join, for example, the Netherlands. Of course, we are also represented on the European continent, from Iceland to Russia. Not only EU countries can join, but also continental European countries. Of course, we also have a European membership for anyone anywhere on the European continent or internationally who is interested in our work.
Interessiert ist an unserer Arbeit. Und diese Sektionen sind unglaublich aktiv.
The current sections are incredibly active, and we are pleased that we can visualize the life, beliefs, and actions in these sections through EUROSOLAR TV.
Das Handeln in diesen Sektionen.
Out of the Sections is a permanent series on EUROSOLAR TV, and accordingly, we present it now.
Together with other partners, EUROSOLAR has also promoted a very special project in Russia for the integration of solar energy into the Russian power grid. A new training and demonstration photovoltaic facility in Krasnodar, southern Russia, has been demonstrating the integration of solar energy into the region's electricity distribution grid since July 2020. The project, entitled Solar Microgeneration, is based on significant improvements in the conditions for photovoltaics in Russia. The cooperation benefits from a new law that for the first time in Russia allows the construction of grid-connected PV systems for self-consumption. Surplus electricity can be supplied to the grid and is compensated appropriately. A series of seminars within the educational project is an excellent opportunity to share 40 years of German experience in large-scale implementation of renewable energy sources and their integration into power grids with Russian specialists and young power producers. In cooperation with Russian energy experts and distribution system operators, the aim is also to develop solar-friendly grid connection and feed-in remuneration regulations and testing them in the field of practice. The PV installation is used for training the staff of distribution grid operators and PV installers, as well as for testing purposes. The PV modules were mounted on both a ground structure and a roof imitation to demonstrate different mounting systems. Thanks to the Solar Microgeneration project and the good training of young engineers, the energy transition is starting to take off in Russia. March 10th, 2009 marked the 25th anniversary of the launch of the first modern wind turbine connected to the grid in Catalonia. To celebrate this event, the local branch of EUROSOLAR introduced a groundbreaking initiative, Living from the Sky's Air. It involves the installation of a wind turbine jointly owned by the citizens who provide the money necessary for the realization of the project, a proper wind energy cooperative.
Eine richtige Windenergiegenossenschaft.
The small private company EOLPOP SL was used to develop the project, is responsible for the implementation of the project, and has enabled joint ownership of the turbine. A suitable location was quickly discovered and the project was commissioned. Today, the company takes care of everything related to the operation of the wind turbine on behalf of the citizens involved. The citizens are excited to be an active part of a new energy transition in Catalonia and to truly live off the air of the sky.
We can only call sections of EUROSOLAR. Therefore, send us your events, send us your activities, send us your dates, send us your material. We will report about it here on EUROSOLAR TV. Ladies and gentlemen, the next topic could be discussed throughout the next 250 years. Turning primal houses into zero-energy houses. There exists mainly older housing stock which has to be renovated. And that is realizable nowadays. Mr. Droege, even a primal house can become a zero-energy house.
This surprises many. A lot of people think it can only be done with new houses or by remodeling houses that are not that old, but certainly not with historic houses. Nevertheless, in Germany and other European countries, we have a very extensive historic city core. Villages' landscapes are characterized by historic buildings, historic town centers. How can we improve their energy efficiency? The question is how to equip them with renewable energies in the interest of efficiency. We have a great example of an implementation from Switzerland. A young architect who has been working on this for a long time, very precisely, very enthusiastically, and not only conceptually, like an academic, but also has implemented it. And he talks openly about how he realized it. We are very enthusiastic about that.
Also wir sind ganz begeistert davon.
Architect Peter Felix remodeled 350-year-old farmhouses, which had also been empty for half a century, into zero-energy homes. How? We will show you in the following.
The project is located in the mountain village Lutsch in the Grischun Mountains of Switzerland. The listed building was uninhabited for 60 years and completely falling apart. The entire renovation took 3 years in close collaboration with the preservation department of the region. Wherever possible, we worked with local craftsmen. The energy system we chose for this project is a combination of photovoltaic, solar collectors and geothermal probes. This system gives us the possibility to store the energy that we produce during the summertime into the rock and retrieve that energy in the wintertime to heat the entire house. To protect the historic wooden floors in the house, we decided to incorporate wall heating systems that are completely invisible. Because of its historic value, it's not possible to insulate such a building as one would do a new building construction. In the spa area, we use a heat recovery from air system, which is completely invisible. In today's living area, we kept the light situation and atmosphere of the old barn. With today's technology, it's even possible that a historic house like this produces its own energy. That means in the future, for us, it's clear that each new building has to become a power plant.
Ich bin verbunden mit Peter Felix, Architekt.
I am connected with Peter Felix, architect from Switzerland. Congratulations again for the EUROSOLAR Prize 2020. Very crucial question. Is it really so? Is it possible to turn a several hundred years old listed building into a house that produces energy it consumes itself?
Die selbst verbrauchte Energie selber produziert?
Ja, vielen Dank. Es hat uns wirklich sehr gefreut, dass wir diesen Preis bekommen haben. Und ja,
yes, thank you very much. We were really pleased to receive this award. And yes, that is possible. It also works with a listed building. We managed to preserve such a structure, a cultural asset, to transfer it to the present time, to repurpose it, but not by destroying it, but with preserving the important supporting elements and the culturally important points, and to construct it and develop it in such a way that it produces the energy that it needs itself. And I believe that is our goal. Also, that we want to implement more projects like this in the future, where we say every building should be its own power station and produce at least as much energy as it needs, preferably even more, so that this surplus energy can be fed into a smart grid and thus solve many problems of the future.
Dass man diese überschüssige Energie in ein cleveres Netz einbringen kann und so viele Probleme der Zukunft lösen können.
Would one say, it is feasible with a newly built house. With an existing building, it is becoming rather difficult. It is also possible with a passive house. In Switzerland, these are Minergie houses. Why can you turn such an old building into an Energy Plus house?
Es war für uns von Anfang an klar der Anspruch, dass wir das beweisen.
It was clear to us from the very beginning that we wanted to prove that this was possible for a listed cultural asset. But that means we also had to do a lot of convincing in this regard. With the authorities, with the preservation authorities, and with the building owners. But we managed to make it happen. But it was a long journey, and it took a lot of persuasion.
Ein langer Weg und es brauchte viel Überzeugungskraft.
The decisive factor is that you did not just think about the insulation, but you said we will insert active systems that practically produce the energy for the house.
Genau, wir haben bei diesem Haus eine Kombination zwischen
Exactly. In the house, we have a combination of geothermal probes, photovoltaics, and solar panels. And the way that works is that in the summer season, at this altitude, we have a lot of solar radiation and therefore produce more energy than is actually needed for the house. And we store this energy in the rock via geothermal probes. So it is heated up in the summer, warmed up, and in the winter season, we can draw this energy back to heat the house. Of course, this only works if the geological conditions are met. We have investigated that. We have a fixed rock. We have no water course that would wash away the heat. Instead, it remains there and therefore it works like this. You've heard this question 1,000 times. Now it is going to be asked for the 1,001st time. Is this in any way economically feasible?
Ich glaube, das ist für die Zukunft unseres Planeten die Frage.
I believe that is the wrong question, considering the future of our planet. Because I am convinced that we simply must do it, and that it will pay off in the long run for the preservation of the planet. Imagine if we designed all buildings in the world to produce at least as much energy as they consume. We would have solved a lot of problems. And I believe that must be focused and in the forefront. And in my opinion, looking at short-term economics is the wrong approach.
Sie sehen, ich stehe hier gerade vor einer Baustelle.
As you can see, I am standing in front of a construction site and the architects are very concerned about the building envelope. But in general, they do not concern themselves with an active in-house energy production. Is the Architects Guild basically a bit too conservative?
Das ist sicher so.
That is certainly the case. Many architects are conservative, not only in design, but also in technology. But I believe that is going to change. We do need to go down these new paths. But we also need to use technology in a way that is convenient to use, that we design simple systems. And I believe that is the future. We do not need technocratic solutions. We need simple systems. Whether these are implemented with wind power, geothermal probes, photovoltaics. We need to use all existing systems for the future. Last question. You received the EUROSOLAR Prize 2020, as I said at the beginning. Does receiving the prize help you in any way? Yes, I believe it helped us. Also for publicity. This way it becomes better known that we are innovative in this area. And it also helps us if we are already in contact with someone and can indicate that we have achieved that. That is definitely helpful, and we are convinced that we can continue to insert this in the future. There was the proof. All buildings can supply themselves with energy for comfort, electricity, heat, and also for mobility. It works. Thank you very much. Thanks to you.
Peter Felix also received the EUROSOLAR Prize 2021 for his work. The EUROSOLAR Prizes, Mr. Droege, could be called the Oscars of energy transition.
Nicht nur eigentlich, das sind sie. Und mit dem Europäischen Solarpreis.
Not could, they are. In contrast to the Austrian, Spanish, Italian, or German Solar Prize, the European Solar Prize focuses in particular on projects that are relevant beyond the national level.
Über der nationalen Ebene relevant sind. Modellbeispiele sind.
Projects that represent model samples can make political demands, but can also eliminate prejudices and are interesting from a technical, professional, and investment point of view beyond national borders.
auch aus der Bewohnerseite her interessant sind.
Therefore, the architects and urban planners are very close to us. EUROSOLAR is very architectural and urban positioned. If we manage to transist our cities, our buildings to zero or plus energy, to renewable buildings, power stations that are energy sustainable, then we have already won a large part of this battle.
Dann haben wir schon einen großen Teil dieses Kampfes gewonnen.
We cover the energies where they are needed. At this point, remodeling houses is a fantastic example because everybody in the European area knows historic buildings. Everyone knows the resistance associated with it, the fear to touch them, and the hesitation of the builders.
In einem multinationalen Raum.
In Switzerland, a multinational area, it is being so beautifully illustrated. Of course, there are other examples in Europe, and because of our focus on these projects, we invite everyone to submit their best projects from all over Europe in this area, but also beyond.
In diesem Bereich, aber auch darüber hinaus.
And as I said, I am very proud of our architects in Switzerland.
Peter Felix used the entire pattern of methods that can be considered when implementing energy transition. He relied on the sun, he relied on geothermal energy. Of course, we witnessed this in many renovation projects, but what makes it so special is that an old building, an ancient 250-year-old building, has not only been reduced in emissions, but that this house has become a zero-energy house. It is completely emission-free. And that, of course, explains why it won the EUROSOLAR prize, because it shows that it does not matter which building is being remodeled. It can be done with all buildings.
We have the whole range, and you, Mr. Farensky, gave a good example. A range, a whole spectrum of renewable energy systems that can be used.
Once again, congratulations to Peter Felix for the EUROSOLAR Prize 2021. And what Peter Felix can do can be done by you too.
The Ires, the
International Renewable Energy Storage Conference 2021, is a pioneer. It is the world's largest scientific conference for energy storage. Mr. Droege, energy storage is almost underestimated in the public discussion. Without energy storage, we will never get the grid free of fossil fuels.
We are all working as a society, as a policy, as EUROSOLAR. Therein our allies and associations towards 100% renewable energy supply, in electricity, in heat, in all sectors, whether it is transport, industry, households, trade, or processes. How can this be achieved? Solar, wind, hydroelectric power are so-called intercenter sources, so it is very useful to store them. Short-term or long-term, seasonal or creating very sparking speeds. In addition, it is very useful to exchange electricity and heat. It is possible to have a test run using renewable energies for the time being, without using them completely right away. For this, storage facilities are needed: heat storage, electricity storage, mobile storage, stationary storage. In the year of 2006, EUROSOLAR developed a conference, an exhibition. It runs under the name International Renewable Energy Storage Conference and Exhibition. An exhibition of this form had not been implemented yet. Since then, we planned it every year for over 10 years in Berlin, and with our support, something great came of it, namely the formation of the Bundesverband Energiespeicher, BVES, Federal Association for Energy Storage. Professor Eike Weber was a founder and first chairman. I remember when we were standing in our wonderful conference room at Alexanderplatz in Berlin at that time, and we all said, "So actually, we would like to cooperate with partners who share the same vision." This resulted in a move of IRES to the Messe Düsseldorf, where an Energy Storage Europe trade fair was being established. We support this by presenting IRES in a purely scientific way. We are taking over the scientific area. The Energy Storage Europe is practically a companion conference for the trade fair exhibition, where 300, 400 or 500 exhibitors exhibited every year in 2015-2016, whereby it has been interrupted by 2 years due to COVID. I am thrilled that we can work in cooperation with the Bundesverband Energiespeicher at the Messe Düsseldorf and build a combined trade fair that consists of different parts. On the one hand, a joint first day between Energy Storage Europe and International Renewable Energy Storage. At the same time, the scientists of Ires 21 and the more economic political workshops of BVES will take place, in which we simultaneously create poster exhibitions on the topic of business and science. This program continues until the third day. On that day, the BVES conference ends, and on the third day, there's one more highlight in German taking place, considering everything else is in English. On this day, we spend a whole day together with the Energieagentur Nordrhein-Westfalen Erneuerbare Energiespeicher, Themen in Deutschland. That will take place on the 18th. So the 16th is when we start. 17th is the second day. 18th is the final day with the Energieagentur Nordrhein-Westfalen Erneuerbare Energiespeicher Themen, and then it is already over. Only 3 days.
You can be part of Ires 2021 by registering yourself on the EUROSOLAR website. Now I am connected with Andreas Hauer. He represents Conference Chair of ESE, the trade fair that Peter Droege has just described. Mr. Hauer, I am making sure that your face is about to turn red with the following question. The technologies exist, but political regulation stands far behind technical development. Is that the case?
Das würde ich nie so sagen. Nein.
I would never say it like that. No, I think there definitely is a certain discrepancy, and that is pretty much the topic that we want to work out together on the first day of this conference. As Mr. Droege described, and I think we will succeed in doing that.
Und ich glaube, das wird uns auch gelingen. Also ich bin mir ziemlich sicher, dass
So I'm pretty sure that this question, whether we will have a final answer, that I do not know, but that it will definitely be addressed. We invited very interesting guests. We have an opening, which is going to be wonderful as always.
Wir haben eine Eröffnung, wunderbar, wie immer. Aber
But then we have some very high-profile speakers coming in 3 sessions, who will exactly outline the regulatory framework which is being dictated to us by policies on many issues. Maybe I will just a couple of names. Kadri Simpson, the EU Commissioner, will have a word. The Austrian Federal Minister Leonor Gewessler, Climate Protection, Environment, Energy Mobility is going to be there, and alongside we have 2 international speakers from IRENA, among others Dolph Gielen. Furthermore, Rohit Khanna from the World Bank. Therein actual European issues are being addressed, as well as issues related to Austria as a country, but as a rather smaller entity. And finally, we address global issues. The mentioned 4 speakers will give us a bit of a framework. Then in the next session, representatives from the industry itself are invited. Among others, Mr. Kalweit from Bosch. He is responsible for CO2 neutrality within the group. Furthermore, Mr. Ires from the ThyssenKrupp, who is working on green hydrogen. So suddenly we witness how individual companies are trying to create solutions within this context, and I am sure that it's going to be really exciting, because in the end we have to bring it together somehow. And this point, what we have heard before, which is climate and energy, is merged with real people who are trying to solve problems through energy storage. I am extremely excited about that. At the end, we have a nice panel discussion with top-class Hans-Martin Henning from the Fraunhofer Institute for Solar Energy Systems. I believe he has been promoted to chairman of the expert commission for the German government. In the context of this panel discussion, we will move towards the following questions. What is the future? What does it look like? What can a future energy system with storage facilities look like? Which sums up the question asked at the beginning of this interview. I am convinced that we will be able to come up with an answer.
I have never heard such a great announcement of a trade fair.
You should visit.
Only Frank Sinatra's comeback at Madison Square Garden in 1974 was announced this good. I will ask content-related questions in a moment, but very briefly, how can our viewers of EUROSOLAR TV be present at the trade fair?
As Mr. Droege said, they can order tickets on the internet. They then receive an access code through which they participate. The first day is planned simultaneously for both events. After that, it will slightly split into two different events. Mr. Droege already mentioned, science is tied to Ires. We set up workshops that are hosted by the German Energy Storage Association. These workshops involve questions regarding financing or standards and things like that. For example, one session has international markets as a subject. Consequently, certain topics are examined more intensively. Tickets are available on the internet. You can search for them in your web browser using the keywords Energy Storage Europe or IRES. We strongly recommend to book tickets.
So that means we are full. As an online event, you are participating online the whole time.
Yes, therefore you will be able to practically see everything. I hope we will manage to host the event quite well. My colleague Peter Felix from Fraunhofer ISE and myself will host it. Throughout we will sit on a couch, at least that is how we imagine it, and comment on and classify practically every presentation. Therefore we will perhaps contribute a bit more than in a normal event. Consequently, we will not only announce the speakers but also host the event a bit.
What specific value do I earn by following the conference?
After all, we address different groups, but one of our target groups are manufacturers of storage systems and people who want to bring storage systems into the market. So in this regard, you will get a lot of inspiration in terms of the framework conditions, but also in terms of the technologies regarding storage systems. The beauty of combining the two conferences, IRES and Energy Storage Europe, is that we can shed more light on actual business cases. For example, how such a technology is incorporated into the market. At the same time, we look at the scientific part. What else is in the pipeline? What is still to come? Of course, we always have technology developments in the storage area. Mr. Droege briefly mentioned it already, and they are staggering because we have so many different technologies. It is not just about batteries. It is about thermal storage. It is about chemical storage, about hydrogen. It is about a whole range of topics, wherein there is always new to offer in terms of scientific development, and we have to integrate these developments into applications. For this purpose, the two differently oriented events are very good because they come together at this point.
Finally, I would like to make one more point about the content of the Ires, which is important regarding its international conference. As we just said, most of the content is presented in the English language. Only on one day, at the end, it will be held in German. We do not only need regulations that change national legislation, but we also need international regulations that regulate and represent the topics discussed in the interconnected grids. That is why internationality is so important. But we are still far away from that. Basically, there are two EU framework directives, but in terms of regulation, we are still far too nationally oriented.
Ja, auf jeden Fall. Also das ist
Definitely, yes. That is an important point, Mr. Farensky. We are hoping that the EU Commissioner will perhaps shed some light on the European aspect. At the moment, the EU is taking steps ahead regarding many aspects, and now the individual countries must follow along. This is being implemented to varying degrees. We will have to talk about that. You just mentioned international connections. As an example, right now I am involved in an activity relating to the World Bank, Energy Storage Partnership. Therein, storage facilities are being promoted in developing countries. What makes it so exciting is that the energy structures there are not as outdated as we find them here. Instead, we can study and test completely new approaches there. In other words, decentralized systems. There, storage facilities are particularly important. It is about self-sufficiency and, moreover, the diversity of technologies. So it is not just batteries. Many battery-related topics are important there, but also, for example, thermal cold storage. So that is a very interesting point, where internationality plays an important role.
Thank you very much, Andreas Hauer. You have definitely got us excited about the trade fair. So, be a participant and visit the website of EUROSOLAR, where you can register yourself. You will also find the link in the description box linked to this YouTube video. See you at Ires 2021. Thank you very much. That was the first edition of EUROSOLAR TV. Mr. Droege, any thoughts?
I am very excited. It is a shame that it is already over, and I look forward to the next episode of EUROSOLAR TV.
Dear viewers, we are very enthusiastic about ourselves. Hopefully, you also enjoyed the show, and the best part is, we will be back. That was the first episode of EUROSOLAR TV.